The school hallway buzzed with the chaotic energy of passing period. Lockers slammed, students chatted, and sneakers squeaked against the polished floor. For most, it was just another ordinary day. But for one girl, today had taken a terrifying turn. A bully, tall, confident, and cruel, had cornered her near the lockers. His hands gripped her shoulders, then tightened slightly around her neck. She gasped, struggling, her heart pounding as the world around her blurred with panic. "Come on, don't act like you're scared," he sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You think anyone will stop me?" The girl fought to keep calm, trying to push him away, but his strength and aggression made it nearly impossible. Students nearby froze, some whispering, some stepping back, afraid to intervene. The tension in the hallway was almost tangible. "You're weak," the bully mocked, tightening his grip just enough to send a sharp jolt of fear through her. "Pathetic." The girl's hands shook as she tried to defend herself, but her mind raced. She knew she couldn't give in to fear, not here, not now. She took a deep breath, pushing back with words instead of force. "Stop," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the terror in her chest. "You won't get away with this." The bully laughed, a harsh, cruel sound that echoed down the hallway. He didn't recognize the courage in her eyes. To him, this was just a game. Another chance to assert dominance, to humiliate someone smaller and weaker. And then, a shadow appeared at the end of the hallway. Footsteps, deliberate and fast, echoed against the linoleum floor. The bully didn't notice at first, too focused on his victim. But the students did. Heads turned. Phones subtly lifted. Whispers ran like wildfire. "Someone is coming." The girl felt a sudden flicker of hope, though she didn't yet know who was arriving. Her hands gripped his arms, straining, but her eyes lifted toward the approaching figure. In that moment, the hallway seemed to freeze. Time stretched. The bully's smirk faltered, instinctively sensing something, but he couldn't know what was coming. And as the footsteps grew louder, closer, the girl's heart raced, not just from fear, but from the anticipation of rescue. Because the person about to arrive was not just anyone. He was her father. And the moment he stepped into the hallway, everything was about to change. The hallway had quieted slightly, not from kindness, but from fear. Students instinctively moved to the sides, forming a tentative corridor around the girl and her tormentor. Lockers rattled in the background as whispers spread like wildfire. Phones were subtly lifted, capturing what no one wanted to miss. The bully, tall and imposing, didn't notice the change. He thrived on attention, feeding off the gasps, the shock, and the unease of those around him. His grin widened, cruel and self-satisfied. "You really thought you could stand up to me?" he jeered, tightening his grip just enough to elicit a sharp gasp from the girl. Pathetic. The girl, Keanu Reeves' daughter, was terrified but composed. She refused to scream, refused to cry. Her hands pressed against his chest, pushing subtly, trying to create distance. Her eyes darted toward the end of the hallway, seeking help, seeking hope. And then she saw him, Keanu Reeves. He wasn't charging in like a hero from an action movie. He wasn't yelling or running. He walked calm, measured, composed. Every step exuded control, authority, and quiet strength. His posture was upright, his shoulders relaxed, yet there was an unmistakable tension in the air, as if the very space around him recognized his presence. The bully caught sight of him, and for the first time, his smirk faltered. He didn't understand who he was really facing. He only saw a tall, calm man approaching slowly, deliberately, the kind of presence that unsettled even the most confident adversaries. "Who's that?" muttered one student under their breath, eyes wide. "Is that—" The girl's fingers trembled slightly on his arms, but her heart lifted. She knew this man. She trusted him. She knew he could protect her, but more importantly, he could teach a lesson without losing control. The bully, sensing the change, straightened. "You've got someone backing you," he mocked, though the edge of uncertainty had crept into his voice. His confidence had been absolute a moment ago. Now it was wavering. Keanu slowed his pace, scanning the hallway. His gaze met his daughter's first, a brief nod of reassurance, calm but powerful. Then he fixed the bully with a look that didn't need words, an unspoken warning. The students in the hallway could feel it immediately. The energy had shifted. The air itself seemed to tighten. The bully, for all his bravado, felt the first real crack in his armor. "Relax," Keanu said softly, calm yet commanding, though his voice didn't need to be loud. "Step away." The bully's first instinct was to push harder, to assert dominance. But the weight in Keanu's gaze, the quiet authority, was unsettling. For the first time, he hesitated. The girl took a careful step back, putting herself slightly out of his grip. She was no longer just a victim. She was standing, ready to be protected, ready for her father's intervention. Other students whispered among themselves, astonished at the stark contrast. The bully, loud, brash, and overconfident, was meeting someone calm, deliberate, and unshakable. It wasn't just physical presence. It was an invisible force, quiet but undeniable. And in that moment, everyone in the hallway knew something critical. The confrontation that had seemed one-sided was about to change completely. The bully's arrogance would meet calculated authority. And the lesson, when it came, would be unforgettable. The hallway had grown unnaturally silent. Students who had been whispering, laughing, or scrolling through their phones now watched with wide eyes, frozen in suspense. The bully, previously brimming with confidence, sensed the shift, but didn't yet understand its source. "Step aside," Keanu Reeves said, his voice calm, measured, carrying a quiet authority that made the air itself feel heavier. The bully laughed, a short, sharp bark meant to intimidate, but it lacked conviction. He leaned closer to Keanu's daughter, trying to assert control one last time. "You really think this guy can stop me?" he sneered, his tone dripping with arrogance. "I've handled tougher than you." Keanu didn't move. His posture was relaxed, yet every step he had taken toward the hallway had communicated dominance, without aggression. His eyes, calm and unwavering, locked onto the bully, analyzing every micro-expression, the tightening of his jaw, the flicker of doubt in his smirk, the twitch of his hands. "You shouldn't underestimate people," Keanu said softly, his voice carrying more weight than the bully expected, especially those who know how to stay calm when others panic. The bully scoffed, but his bravado wavered. He shifted his weight, trying to appear in control, but the confident stance that had carried him this far now looked forced, unnatural. His grip on the girl loosened slightly, almost imperceptibly. Some students whispered among themselves. Phones were raised carefully, capturing the tension, but nobody intervened physically yet. None wanted to provoke the bully, while the situation was still dangerous. The girl, her chest heaving from the struggle, took a cautious step back, letting Keanu's presence fill the space between her and the aggressor. Her eyes met her father's, and for a moment, she drew strength from his calm. Fear was still there, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. "You're making a mistake," Keanu continued, his voice deliberate. "You think power comes from intimidation. It doesn't. It comes from control. And right now you've lost both." The bully's hands twitched. He wanted to act, to push, to show dominance, but the tension in the hallway was almost tangible, pressing against him. His smirk faltered. For the first time, he felt fear, a slow, creeping realization that this situation was no longer under his control. "Get away from her," Keanu said again, a touch firmer this time. His calm had shifted subtly into authority. The words were quiet, but they hit like a hammer. The bully stumbled backward slightly, trying to regain composure. I'm not scared of you," he muttered, though his voice betrayed him. Every step Keanu had taken, every movement, every pause, communicated one thing. Consequences were coming. Students held their breath. The hallway seemed suspended in time. Even the lockers, normally mundane and unremarkable, seemed to echo with the weight of the confrontation. The bully's ego, which had seemed invincible moments ago, now teetered on the edge of collapse. Keanu's daughter finally straightened her posture. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was standing beside her father, ready for protection, ready for justice. The combination of calm authority and quiet threat radiating from Keanu was enough to shift the balance entirely. The bully's smirk disappeared completely. The laughter, the taunting, the false confidence, all evaporated. In its place was hesitation, uncertainty, and the faint tremor of fear. He realized, too late, that the moment had passed where arrogance could save him. And as Keanu took a deliberate step closer, the entire hallway seemed to tighten around them. The bully now faced a choice: retreat or face consequences he hadn't anticipated. The students could feel it. Every eye fixed on the scene. Every breath caught in suspense. The confrontation that had started as a display of bullying was now a test of control, courage, and authority. And in that moment, the bully understood. He had misjudged the wrong person. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. The bully, once brimming with confidence, now hesitated, his hands slightly raised as if preparing for a fight he wasn't sure he could win. Students lined the corridor, frozen in a mixture of fear and anticipation. Lockers slammed somewhere in the distance, but their noise seemed distant, almost muffled, under the tension that had taken over the space. Keanu Reeves moved slowly forward, each step deliberate, precise, measured. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Yet, every movement he made carried authority, a quiet power that immediately drew every eye in the hallway. The bully flinched slightly at the sound of those steps. His smirk had vanished. "You don't know who you're dealing with," Keanu said softly, his voice calm yet piercing. It was the kind of tone that made the world seem to shrink around him. Not loud, not threatening, but heavy, unyielding, and undeniable. The bully's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to reply, to assert his arrogance, but no words came. The silence stretched, oppressive. Every student could feel the shift, the slow but unstoppable tipping of power. The hallway was no longer a place of fear for the girl. It was a stage for justice. Keanu's daughter, standing just behind him, straightened her shoulders. For the first time, she felt truly safe. Her father's calm radiated reassurance, and that quiet confidence bolstered her own courage. She no longer struggled, no longer felt the crushing weight of fear. Instead, she exuded a quiet strength, mirrored in the calm authority her father displayed. The bully took a step forward, perhaps thinking he could reclaim dominance. But Keanu's gaze never wavered. One slow, deliberate step toward him was enough to make the bully pause, as if invisible weight of authority pressed against him. Students leaned slightly forward, sensing the impending resolution. "You've spent too long thinking intimidation works," Keanu said, his tone steady, almost conversational, yet every word carried the weight of consequence. "But it doesn't. Not here. Not now. And certainly not with me standing beside her." The bully's hands twitched nervously. His confident posture began to crumble. For the first time, fear crept into his eyes, not fear of violence, but fear of accountability. He realized, with a jolt of panic, that his actions had finally caught up to him. Keanu took another step forward, and the shift was unmistakable. The hallway itself seemed to tighten, compressing the space, focusing attention entirely on the confrontation. Students gasped softly. Phones wavered in midair, capturing the intensity, but no one dared to interfere. They knew instinctively that this was no ordinary moment. It was a lesson being delivered, a balance being restored. The bully faltered, stepping back slightly. His smirk was gone, replaced by hesitation. Sweat formed on his brow, betraying the panic he desperately tried to suppress. The grin that had fueled his arrogance was now replaced with the stark realization he was no longer in control. Keanu's daughter watched, awe and relief blending in her gaze. She understood now why her father had always been calm under pressure. Strength, she realized, didn't roar. It didn't shout. It moved quietly, with precision and authority. And when it acted, the world noticed. One final, deliberate step brought Keanu close enough that the bully could feel the unspoken power radiating from him. No words needed to be shouted. No threat needed to be delivered. The quiet presence alone forced the bully to acknowledge his mistake. "Step away," Keanu said softly, his voice low but unwavering. "You've had your moment. Now it's over." The bully swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. He looked around at the students, at the lockers, at the girl he had tried to intimidate, and finally, he stepped back completely. His posture sagged, his confidence shattered. He had learned, in an instant, the consequences of arrogance and cruelty. The hallway, which had been tense with fear and anticipation, now seemed to release a collective breath. The girl stepped fully behind her father, safe, empowered, and reassured. Students whispered in awe, cameras and phones lowered. They had witnessed a moment of calm authority defeating aggression without violence, a lesson far more powerful than any punishment could convey. Keanu glanced at his daughter briefly, a subtle nod of reassurance passing between them. She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and pride, knowing she had stood her ground, and had a father who could turn fear into safety with nothing more than presence and control. The bully, defeated and humbled, remained frozen, unsure of how to leave without embarrassment. His arrogance had evaporated completely, replaced by the understanding that some lessons cannot be ignored. And in that hallway, amidst the silent witnesses and the faint hum of lockers, one truth was clear. Strength isn't loud. True power doesn't need to shout. It waits patiently, observes carefully, and strikes with quiet precision when the moment demands it. The hallway was quiet now, save for the faint shuffle of lockers and the distant murmur of students returning to their routines. The bully's bravado had evaporated entirely, leaving him pale, nervous, and defeated. Every student present had witnessed the unmistakable shift in power, the transformation of a situation that had once seemed one-sided into a lesson in authority, control, and justice. Keanu Reeves stood calmly, shoulders squared, his eyes steady and unwavering. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't raised a fist. And yet, the message had been clear. Bullying and intimidation had no place here. Not against his daughter, not against anyone, and certainly not when met with quiet authority. The girl, standing slightly behind him, exhaled slowly. Her knees were weak, her chest still heaving from the earlier struggle, but she no longer trembled. Her eyes shone with a mixture of awe and relief. She realized, with a quiet gratitude, that her father's calm had done what panic and pleading could never accomplish. It had neutralized fear, delivered justice, and restored order in a single, unspoken stroke. The bully, meanwhile, looked around, realizing that the hallway was full of witnesses to his failure. The students who had initially frozen now whispered amongst themselves, exchanging glances that blended relief, admiration, and even shame for having been complicit in the tense scene. Some quietly recorded the encounter on their phones. Others simply watched, too stunned to speak. Keanu stepped closer to his daughter, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. The gesture was gentle, protective, and reassuring. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, calm, and steady, carrying no anger, only concern. She nodded. "Yes, Dad, thanks." The bully, sensing the finality of the moment, finally attempted to speak. I didn't mean." Keanu's gaze shifted slightly, just enough to convey authority without aggression. "Intentions don't matter here," he said. "Actions do. And you made a choice to hurt someone. That choice has consequences." The bully's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he seemed ready to argue. But the weight of Keanu's presence, combined with the silent witnesses of the hallway, made words impossible. His fear had morphed into humiliation, a crushing recognition that his arrogance had failed spectacularly. One of the teachers, who had arrived during the confrontation, stepped forward. "You will be reporting to the principal immediately," she said firmly, nodding toward the office. "And there will be consequences." The bully swallowed hard, looking at the floor. He knew there was no escaping the lesson, no twisting it to his favor. The hallway itself seemed to release a collective breath as he slowly backed away, the lesson now indelibly etched into his memory. Keanu turned back to his daughter, crouching slightly so their eyes met. "You handled yourself well," he said, pride softening his calm authority. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing strong despite it. Remember that." The girl's lips curled into a small, relieved smile. "I'll remember." Students began to move again, some offering quiet nods or whispers of admiration toward the father-daughter duo. The tension that had gripped the hallway moments ago dissipated, replaced with a sense of awe and respect. Those who had witnessed the confrontation now understood the true power of calm, measured action over anger and aggression. Keanu gave one last look at the bully, who now lingered near the lockers, head bowed, hands fidgeting nervously. "Learn from this," he said simply. "And next time, think before you act." The bully, unable to meet his eyes, nodded silently. The lesson was clear. Humiliation had been delivered without a fight, and karma, though quiet, had struck with precision. Keanu finally took his daughter's hand, and together they walked down the hallway, moving past the whispers, the gawking students, and the stunned staff. Each step was calm, measured, deliberate. No one dared interrupt. The quiet authority and unwavering presence they carried left an impression far deeper than any raised voice could have. As they disappeared around the corner, the hallway seemed to return to its normal rhythm, but the lesson lingered. Bullying, arrogance, and intimidation had met their match, and for those who had witnessed it, the message was clear. True strength is not loud. It is calm. It is precise. It is patient. The bully remained frozen for a moment longer, reflecting on the power of restraint and authority he had underestimated. And somewhere deep inside, he knew he would never make the same mistake again. The hallway had witnessed instant karma, and it had done so quietly, definitively, and without a single unnecessary word or blow. The hallway slowly returned to its usual rhythm, though the echoes of what had just occurred lingered in every corner. Lockers closed, sneakers squeaked, and the distant chatter of students resumed, but the air still carried the tension and awe left by the confrontation. Keanu Reeves and his daughter walked side by side, calm and composed, yet their presence seemed to radiate authority long after they had passed. Students lingered in the corridor, exchanging whispered accounts of what had happened. Some were wide-eyed with astonishment, others shook their heads in disbelief. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something rare, a lesson in courage, restraint, and instant justice. The girl, still catching her breath, glanced at her father. "Dad, that was incredible," she said softly, her voice a mixture of awe and relief. "You didn't even have to yell or fight." Keanu smiled faintly. "Sometimes the most powerful actions are quiet," he replied. "It's not about winning with force. It's about standing strong with control." Meanwhile, the bully had been escorted to the principal's office. His steps were slow, hesitant. His arrogance had been replaced with a heavy sense of shame, a weight that made each movement feel laborious. The students who had previously cowered around him now watched with a mix of satisfaction and reflection. They had seen arrogance humbled, and the lesson was far more impactful than any detention or reprimand could have delivered. Teachers and staff who had arrived during the incident lingered, discussing the events quietly. "I've never seen someone handle a situation like that without escalating it," one whispered to another. "It wasn't just his skill, it was his calm. The way he commanded authority, incredible." Students who had initially laughed at the girl, or tried to ignore the bullying, now approached her quietly. Some offered apologies. Others simply nodded in respect. Even those who had been passive witnesses seemed changed, aware now that courage and integrity could shift a situation instantly, sometimes more effectively than confrontation or aggression. Keanu's daughter felt a new sense of confidence. She had stood her ground, yes, but she had also learned from her father. Strength was not about size or loudness. It was about composure, observation, and timing. She walked taller now, chest forward, shoulders squared, carrying the quiet dignity her father had demonstrated. For the bully, the lesson would stay with him long after the moment had passed. Embarrassment alone might have stung, but the deeper impact was the recognition of authority grounded in skill, patience, and morality. He would remember that appearances could be deceiving, that quiet power often carries the greatest consequences. Students whispered among themselves, recounting every detail of Keanu's approach, his calm gaze, and the subtle shifts in the hallway. Phones had captured fragments, but the experience itself, the tension, the anticipation, the ultimate resolution, was something no recording could fully convey. As the final bell rang, releasing the students into the chaos of the day, one truth remained clear. Respect isn't demanded through fear. It's earned through action, integrity, and the quiet demonstration of strength. Keanu glanced at his daughter one last time before she headed off to class. "Remember," he said softly, "people will challenge you. They'll test you. But the way you handle yourself, calmly, thoughtfully, with integrity, is what truly matters." She nodded, understanding now that her father had taught her more than defense. He had taught her resilience, courage, and the quiet power of presence. The hallway, now emptying, seemed almost serene. The echoes of conflict had faded, leaving only reflection, awe, and a subtle shift in perspective for those who had witnessed it. In just a few moments, a dangerous confrontation had transformed into a powerful lesson that would be remembered long after the day ended. And in that moment, it was clear, real strength doesn't need to roar. It waits, observes, and strikes with precision when the time is right, leaving its mark quietly but indelibly on everyone who witnesses it. The school hallway had returned to its normal rhythm. Lockers clanged. Students hurried to their next classes, and teachers resumed their routines. But for those who had witnessed what had just happened, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every glance, every whisper, carried the memory of a moment that had changed the balance of power, respect, and understanding in that corridor. Keanu Reeves had walked in quietly, calmly, but his presence had been enough to shift the entire dynamic. No shouting, no threats, no unnecessary force, just quiet authority, measured steps, and unshakable composure. It was a lesson in restraint that none of the students would forget. His daughter, still catching her breath, had learned something vital that day. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting with strength even when your heart pounds and your instincts scream otherwise. She had stood her ground, and she had been protected not by aggression, but by a calm, deliberate display of power. She now understood that true strength comes from presence, patience, and the willingness to act with precision when the moment demands it. The bully, once arrogant and loud, had learned his own lesson. Humiliation and fear had replaced bravado, but more importantly, he had seen the consequences of arrogance firsthand. Power without respect is fragile, easily dismantled by patience and integrity. He had underestimated someone he thought would be helpless, and he had been proven wrong in the most public, undeniable way. The students who had been passive witnesses now carried a new awareness. They had seen courage tempered with restraint, authority exercised without cruelty, and strength expressed without unnecessary violence. Phones may have captured images, but the true lesson was deeper than anything a video could show. It was about integrity, humility, and understanding that appearances can be deceiving. Even the teachers reflected on the event. "I've never seen anything like that," one whispered to another. It wasn't just physical presence. It was the calm, the patience, the message it sent without a single raised voice. Keanu had left quietly, walking out with his daughter beside him, leaving the hallway behind, but not the impression. The echoes of what had happened lingered, an invisible lesson imprinted in the minds of everyone who had been there. Respect, courage, and accountability had been delivered without spectacle, without ego, yet more profoundly than any shouting or punishment could achieve. For viewers watching this story unfold, whether in real life or through a screen, the takeaway is clear. True strength doesn't need to shout. Real authority doesn't need to dominate. Courage is measured not in volume or aggression, but in calm, deliberate action, and the wisdom to know when and how to act. Arrogance, bullying, and intimidation always meet consequences, sometimes quietly, sometimes dramatically, but always undeniably. And sometimes the lesson isn't just for the aggressor. It's for everyone watching, learning, and absorbing the subtle power of presence and integrity. So the next time someone underestimates you, remembers your value, or tries to push you around, remember this. The quiet, measured, confident response can speak louder than any argument. True respect is earned, not demanded. True strength is exercised with wisdom, patience, and precision. Speech balloon type respect. If you believe humility and courage are the real forms of power. Speech balloon comment where you're watching from. I read every message and story. Because sometimes the quietest moments leave the loudest impressions, shaping lessons and memories that last far beyond the moment itself.